The water is chest-deep, and the crowd above has gone silent. Somewhere beneath the imperial box, wooden hulls creak against one another, and men dressed as sailors grip their oars, waiting for a signal that will decide whether they live to see the sun set over the Tiber. It is the year 80, and the Emperor Titus has flooded the arena floor of a brand new amphitheater to stage a naval battle inside the very heart of Rome. 50,000 voices hold their breath. Then the trumpets sound, oars strike water, and the crowd erupts as two miniature fleets crash together in mock combat, the spray catching the afternoon light. Ancient writers tell us this actually happened in the first days the building ever opened its gates, though exactly how the Romans waterproofed the arena floor to make it happen remains one of the enduring puzzles of Roman engineering. How did a structure built to host such spectacles come to exist at all? Who ordered its creation, who built it, and what happened inside its walls for the next 4 centuries? This is the story of the building the Romans called the Flavian Amphitheater, a name history would later replace with another, the Colosseum. Before diving deeper into its secrets, if you're the kind of viewer who loves uncovering the hidden engineering and human stories behind the ancient world, consider subscribing, because we're only just getting started. To understand why the Colosseum exists, you first have to understand what it replaced. In the years before its construction, the Emperor Nero had seized a vast stretch of central Rome for himself, following the Great Fire of the year 64. On that land he built the Domus Aurea, his golden house, a sprawling private palace complete with gardens, pavilions, and an artificial lake ringed by colonnades, all reserved for his own pleasure in the middle of a city that had just burned. When Nero died by suicide in the year 68, and the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors finally settled, with Vespasian claiming the throne, the new Flavian dynasty needed to make a statement. Vespasian was not born into aristocracy. He had risen through military command, and he understood that legitimacy in Rome was not simply inherited, it was built, quite literally, in stone. So he chose the most symbolically loaded plot of land in the city, Nero's private lake. He ordered it drained, and on its foundations he began raising a public amphitheater, open to every citizen of Rome, a monument that quite deliberately returned to the people what a hated emperor had stolen for himself. The engineering challenge alone was staggering. Roman surveyors and architects had to design a structure roughly 189 meters long and 156 meters wide, standing some 50 meters high, an elliptical form chosen specifically because it eliminated the blind corners of a rectangular arena and gave every spectator a clear sightline to the action below. Builders sank concrete foundations deep into the drained lake bed, using volcanic ash from the region around Naples mixed with lime and rubble to create a concrete so durable that portions of it survive intact 2,000 years later. Above ground, they erected an outer ring of travertine limestone, quarried from Tivoli some 30 kilometers away and hauled to the site by teams of oxen along a purpose-built road. Beneath that gleaming travertine skin, builders used lighter volcanic tuff and brick-faced concrete for internal walls, a clever distribution of weight that let the structure rise higher without collapsing under its own mass. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of laborers worked on the project, a workforce likely swelled by prisoners taken during the Jewish War that had just concluded in Judea. A fragmentary inscription discovered at the site, reconstructed by modern scholars, suggests the building itself may have been funded by the spoils of that very conflict, a detail that adds a sobering layer to a monument so often remembered only for its grandeur. The scale of labor involved is difficult to overstate. Cranes, powered by human treadwheels, lifted travertine blocks weighing several tons apiece into position, block by block, ring by ring, as the elliptical walls rose story by story. Iron clamps, some weighing many kilograms, bound the stones together, a detail we know partly because those very clamps were later gouged out by scavengers, leaving the pockmarked holes still visible across the building's surface today. Roman engineers also built an elaborate drainage system beneath the foundations, channels, and cisterns designed to carry away rainwater and prevent the structure from sitting in standing water. A genuine concern, given that the entire building rose from what had recently been the bed of an artificial lake. Scholars still debate exactly how quickly the project moved forward, but most agree that raising a structure of this size within roughly a decade represents one of the more remarkable construction achievements of the ancient world, a pace made possible only by an almost unimaginable concentration of labor, material, and imperial will. Vespasian did not live to see it finished. He died in the year 79, and it fell to his son Titus to complete the work and open it to the public the following year, in 80. Ancient historians tell us the inaugural games lasted 100 days, filled with animal hunts, gladiatorial contests, and those extraordinary staged naval battles that opened our story. Thousands of animals reportedly died during these opening spectacles, a number so large that some ancient sources treat it with visible astonishment. Whether every detail in those accounts is precisely accurate is impossible to confirm, since ancient historians sometimes rounded numbers for dramatic effect. But the scale described was clearly meant to announce, unmistakably, that a new dynasty had arrived and intended to be remembered. Picture, now, what it felt like to approach this building for the first time as an ordinary resident of Rome. You would have walked through streets crowded with vendors selling spiced wine and roasted chestnuts, past the towering bronze colossus of Nero, repurposed and relocated nearby. A statue so immense it would eventually lend the amphitheater its more famous nickname centuries later. Around you rose temples, aqueduct arches, and the general clatter of a city that never seemed to sleep. Mule carts, hawkers, soldiers, and the smell of dust, sweat, and street food thick in the air. And then, rounding a corner, the amphitheater itself would fill your entire field of vision. 4 stories of arched stone stacked in ascending architectural orders. Doric at the base, then Ionic, then Corinthian, each level accented with half columns that gave the exterior a rhythmic, almost musical quality despite its sheer bulk. Entry itself was a marvel of crowd logistics that many modern venues still struggle to match. The building had 80 numbered entrances around its perimeter, and spectators carried small pottery or bone tokens, tesserae, inscribed with a section and row number, essentially the ancient equivalent of an assigned seat. This system allowed tens of thousands of people to reach their seats through a network of internal staircases and vaulted passageways called vomitoria, so named because they could disgorge enormous crowds rapidly, and modern engineers who have studied the flow of these corridors have found the design remarkably efficient, in some ways rivaling contemporary stadium engineering. But what waited inside was far more than just seating. Rome was a rigidly stratified society, and the Colosseum's interior was, quite literally, built to display that hierarchy in stone. The emperor and his family occupied a raised box on the shorter axis of the ellipse, the pulvinar, positioned for maximum visibility and maximum visibility of himself in return. Senators sat closest to the arena floor in the Ima Cavea, close enough to see individual expressions on the fighters below. Above them, the wealthier equestrian class filled the media cavea. Higher still, ordinary citizens crowded into the summa cavea, and at the very top, under a colonnaded gallery, sat the poor, slaves, and, according to most ancient sources, women, who were largely restricted to the uppermost, least desirable seats, regardless of their social standing elsewhere. Suspended above the entire structure was the velarium, a retractable canvas awning operated by ropes and rigging, manned by sailors specifically drafted from the Roman naval base at Misenum, since they alone had the rope-handling expertise the system demanded. Now consider the arena floor itself, a wooden surface covered in sand whose Latin name, harena, is in fact the very origin of the word arena. From the seats above, it looked simple, almost plain compared to the towering architecture around it. But what happened beneath that sand was, in time, one of the most astonishing engineering feats of the ancient world. Storage rooms lined these underground corridors, holding scenery, weapons, and the equipment needed to keep an entire day of programming running without visible interruption above. Narrow service passages allowed handlers to move animals from holding pens toward the correct lift shaft without ever crossing paths with a rival beast or a performer waiting for their cue. Some sections of this underground world remained dim and cramped, lit only by torches, the air thick with the smell of animals and damp stone, a striking contrast to the sunlit marble and painted color above. Archaeologists who have mapped this network in detail describe it as something closer to a piece of theatrical machinery than a simple basement, a system built specifically to manufacture wonder for an audience that had no idea how the trick was done. We're roughly at the midpoint of this story, and if you're finding these details as fascinating as I do, tapping that like button genuinely helps this kind of long-form history reach more curious minds like yours. The naval battles we described at the very beginning of this documentary, it turns out, could only have happened in the amphitheater's earliest days because sometime under the Emperor Domitian, Vespasian's younger son who succeeded Titus, an entirely new substructure was built beneath the arena floor, the hypogeum. This two-level underground network, once discovered and excavated by archaeologists in the modern era, revealed a labyrinth of corridors, animal cages, storage rooms, and mechanical lift shafts, over 24 of them, built to hoist caged animals and scenery straight up through trapdoors into the arena above. Ropes and counterweights, operated by teams of laborers working in near darkness, could raise a leopard, a bear, or an entire painted set piece up through the floor in a matter of moments, creating the illusion that beasts and scenery simply materialized from nowhere in front of a gasping crowd. Once this hypogeum existed, staged naval battles were no longer possible here, since flooding would have ruined the machinery below, which is precisely why our opening scene belongs to the amphitheater's very first, unrepeated years. A typical day of games followed a fairly consistent rhythm, one that ancient writers describe with some regularity. The morning began with venaciones, staged animal hunts and displays, featuring creatures gathered from every corner of the empire, lions and leopards from North Africa, bears from the northern provinces, even elephants and rhinoceroses transported by ship at enormous expense and logistical difficulty. Moving these animals was itself a feat few ancient institutions besides the Roman state could have managed, requiring specially built cages, experienced handlers who understood the temperament of each species, and a supply chain stretching from the edges of the empire in North Africa and the Near East all the way to holding pens somewhere near the amphitheater itself, where the creatures waited, sometimes for weeks, before their moment in the arena. The cost of acquiring and transporting a single elephant or rhinoceros alone likely represented a substantial sum, and the fact that emperors were willing to spend such resources on a single afternoon of spectacle tells us a great deal about how central these games were to imperial self-presentation. Around midday came a darker chapter of the program. Public executions, sometimes disguised within staged mythological reenactments, a practice ancient sources describe candidly and modern historians treat as a genuine, if grim, feature of Roman public punishment, rather than pure entertainment. The afternoon belonged to the event Rome is most remembered for, gladiatorial combat. Here, popular imagination and historical reality diverged sharply. Gladiators were not simply doomed slaves thrown into an arena to die. Many were slaves or condemned criminals, yes, but a significant number were free men, auctorati, who voluntarily signed contracts, sometimes driven by desperate debt, sometimes by genuine ambition for fame and prize money. Training took place in dedicated schools called ludi, the largest of which, the Ludus Magnus, stood connected to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel, allowing fighters to pass directly from barracks to arena without ever crossing the public street. Gladiators specialized in distinct fighting styles: the heavily armored murmillo, the net and trident-wielding retiarius, the shield-bearing secutor, each pairing chosen deliberately to create dramatically contrasting duels. Contrary to popular belief, gladiators represented a substantial financial investment for their owners, and evidence suggests trainers and physicians worked hard to keep them alive and combat-ready, since a dead gladiator was, in the coldest economic terms, a wasted asset. Some fights ended in death, but many ended with a defeated fighter granted mercy, and successful gladiators could achieve genuine celebrity, their images scratched into walls across the empire by admirers, even though the profession itself carried a formal legal stain of dishonor. Skeletal remains excavated from a gladiator cemetery in the city of Ephesus have offered modern researchers a rare, direct window into these fighters' lives, revealing well-healed fractures consistent with survived combat, evidence of a specialized diet, and wounds that suggest disciplined, rule-bound fighting rather than the chaotic bloodbath popular imagination often assumes. This single discovery quietly overturned decades of assumptions built largely on later, embellished retellings, reminding historians how much of what people believe about gladiators comes not from Roman evidence itself, but from centuries of storytelling layered on top of it. None of this could happen without an enormous, largely invisible workforce operating in the corridors and chambers behind and beneath the public spectacle. Stagehands managed the lift mechanisms in the hypogeum. Animal handlers, often specialists brought in for their knowledge of particular species, kept dangerous creatures calm and ready. Soldiers maintained order among the crowd. Cleaners worked to clear sand and debris between events. Physicians attended to the wounded. Priests and officials oversaw the religious and ceremonial elements woven throughout the day. This coordination, largely undocumented compared to the emperors and gladiators who receive most of the historical attention, represents its own remarkable achievement in logistics and organization. All of this served a purpose well beyond entertainment. The Roman satirist Juvenal famously criticized his fellow citizens for caring only about bread and circuses, and while his complaint was a moral one, it captured something true. Public games were a tool of imperial governance. An emperor who funded lavish spectacles demonstrated generosity, wealth, and control, reinforcing his authority not through decree, but through spectacle and gift. Attending the games was, in a sense, a civic duty as much as a pleasure, a shared experience that cut across, while simultaneously reinforcing every layer of Roman society, from the senator in his front row seat to the laborer craning his neck from the highest gallery. For ordinary Romans, a day at the amphitheater must have been an overwhelming sensory experience. The smell of sand, sweat, and incense, the roar of tens of thousands of voices rising and falling with each turn of combat, the shifting colors of tunics and togas across the crowd, vendors calling out from the passageways selling food and drink, the shade of the velarium shifting overhead as sailors adjusted its ropes throughout the day. It was noise, heat, fear, celebration, and civic identity, all compressed into a single afternoon. The Colosseum story did not end with antiquity's golden age. Earthquakes, particularly severe tremors recorded in the 9th and 14th centuries, damaged the structure significantly, causing large sections of its outer wall to collapse entirely, the very reason the building today shows only part of its original outer ring. In the centuries that followed, the amphitheater was gradually stripped for its materials, its stone and metal clamps quarried away to build churches, palaces, and even the great Basilica of St. Peter, a practice of reuse that continued for generations until, in the 18th century, the building was formally designated a sacred Christian site in memory of martyrs believed to have died there, a designation that finally halted further stone removal and helped preserve what remained into the modern era. Long before the earthquakes and the stone robbers, the building had already begun quietly changing purpose. As the empire's fortunes shifted and the great public games gradually faded from Roman life, the amphitheater found new uses, at times serving as housing, at times as workshops and small dwellings built directly into its arches, and later still as a fortified stronghold controlled by a powerful medieval Roman family who recognized that its massive walls made for an excellent defensive position. Visitors in later centuries would have found a very different building than the one Titus inaugurated, its arena floor gone, its marble seating stripped away, its corridors repurposed for entirely unrelated daily life, layer upon layer of history quietly accumulating within the same stone shell. Archaeologists continue to make discoveries that reshape our understanding of the building even now, from traces of pigment suggesting parts of the structure were once brightly painted, to detailed studies of the hypogeum's lift mechanisms that reveal just how sophisticated Roman stagecraft truly was. Each new excavation adds another layer to a story that already spans the full arc of the Roman Empire, from Vespasian's calculated act of political theater on a drained imperial lake, to Titus's spectacular 100 days of inauguration, to Domitian's ingenious underground machinery, and finally, to the long, slow transformation of the building across the medieval centuries that followed. If this journey through Rome's greatest arena has captured your imagination, let me know in the comments which ancient site you'd like explored next, and consider subscribing so you don't miss it. What remains standing today is only a fraction of what once rose above the Roman skyline, yet even in its weathered, incomplete state, the Colosseum continues to represent something extraordinary. The ability of ancient engineers, working without modern tools or materials, to conceive and construct a building capable of moving tens of thousands of people efficiently, staging illusions through hidden machinery, and projecting the authority of an empire through architecture alone. It stood at the center of Roman public life for centuries, a stage where politics, engineering, religion, and human ambition all converged beneath a single retractable awning. Few structures from the ancient world speak so directly and so powerfully across 2,000 years of history.